As an organization in the Air Force, we look at a lot of different ways that we like to shape behavior, for example. We want our institution to be one that is based on expectations and standards of conduct. We have our core values of integrity, service, and excellence, and we'd like to infuse those core values into our mission, really into everything that we do. One of the things we have to consider, though, is that our core values, they're just words, right? We can have 10 core values. If we're not applying them in our lives, then they're just simply words that don't really shape behavior. There are three things in particular that we need to focus on that really are the drivers behind those things we value and whether or not we adhere to those things in our lives. That's commitment, loyalty, and trust. Let's talk about those three things. Think about it in your marriages, for example. Often we find that the best marriages are based on trust. The better the trust between two people, the increased level of loyalty that we have in that marriage. If we have loyalty to the marriage, then our commitment is strong and we normally have a long life and a healthy marriage. In other cases, however, you can imagine in a marriage, and you looking back at maybe a broken marriage, somewhere along the line there was probably some level of trust that began to break down. We don't trust each other nearly like we used to, and as the years go on, maybe for whatever reason, we have began to lose trust. That will begin to immediately affect loyalty. Over a period of time, if that's not something that's healed or taken care of, that loyalty being minimized will eventually result in a minimization of the commitment, and that marriage risks failing. The same dynamic applies, for example, with our kids. Can you imagine what little influence we'd have with our teenagers if they didn't trust us? So our relationship with our kids as parenting really revolves around trust, which hopefully will provide a certain relationship of loyalty in that relationship so that we can also have a level of commitment between a parent and their children. Think about this. The Iraqi army today, as we look out onto the news and what we see is happening across the Middle East, we gave the Iraqi army everything they needed to succeed. We gave them tanks, we gave them weapons, we gave them armored carriers, we gave them uniforms, we trained them in tactics, we gave them everything. But what happened as soon as they were confronted with an adversary that really challenged them? Many of them, we have seen, took off their uniforms and they ran from the fight. They gave up their weapons and were unable to fight. That's because there's something that we couldn't give them. Simply commitment, loyalty, and trust. Because they failed to have a coherent level of commitment, loyalty, and trust, that affected their behavior. They weren't committed to giving their lives to that particular cause. Now, not all of them, many of them were, but a large portion of them weren't committed, weren't loyal, and there wasn't a sense of trust among the leadership and even the general officers, and that resulted in a very negative outcome. Interestingly enough, let's think about ISIS. They don't have the best weapons. They weren't trained by the greatest superpower. They weren't given billions of dollars in preparation and training over a series of years. But they were highly successful. And why is that? Because they had commitment, loyalty, and trust. These three drivers in the human phenomenon are extremely important to behavior. People will behave based on what they value, and the level of commitment and loyalty they have to those values will determine in large measure what they will do. In fact, we can know a lot about a person in terms of knowledge. If I know what you know, that will give me very little predictable power to determine what you will do in a given environment. However, if I know what you're committed to, if I know what you value in your life, I have a much higher probability to determine what you will do in a given context. So as leaders, I'll leave you with this, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to really challenge yourself on this. How do we increase commitment, loyalty, and trust? Are we reporting on that in our OPRs and EPRs? Make this officer a commander because they know how to develop an environment of trust with their people? Are we writing our EPRs and saying, make this NCO a first shirt because they know how to increase the level of commitment and loyalty with the people they're responsible for? Or are we focused more on the programs? I would challenge all of us to understand that if we truly want to engineer a deliberate future for our service, that is reflective of the profession of arms and the standards and expectations of our core values, if we truly want to infuse those values into what we do, we need to focus on developing people in an environment of commitment, loyalty, and trust.